With E3 going on, everyone is trying to cover it the best they can. Some are even live streaming this alongside it and being like, I've got some snarky comments and cynical discussion. Let's go and have fun with it, which, that's fine. However, I'm actually avoiding doing most of that. Instead, what I'm actually doing is I'm waiting until the end of the show. Today, I'm not going to talk so much about the E3 coverage. There are a few things I'm excited about, and I will discuss that at the end of the video. Obviously, not all the conferences have gone on, so I'll be able to talk more about the E3, Microsoft, and Bethesda conference, I believe, is what has gone on. I haven't really looked too much into the Bethesda stuff yet. That's what I'm doing today. But for the most part, I kind of want to talk about E3 in general and why I have a sort of weird approach to it, because I wait until the shows are over to actually go into depth talking about everything, because a lot of times we actually see stuff come out after E3 and we get a lot of clarifications after E3, and so that's what I'm excited about, because E3 itself is more of a marketing show, and I'm not so interested in that. I'm interested in the actual announcement and what it actually means. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about E3 in general. Michael here with another topic video. So E3 used to be this huge, exciting show that I was always excited for. When I was a little kid, especially when we were able to get our gaming news pretty much exclusively from magazines and the like. Basically, I was always excited for E3 because it meant the next issue of the magazine would have all this new information and so excited. And that's sort of the experience I kind of expected from E3 for a very long time. And that's sort of what I've always enjoyed about it. I don't necessarily enjoy the conferences because the conferences are mainly a giant marketing show. Originally, they were designed to be these shows that would end up being shown to the press to kind of give them new content to show on their websites. More like previews, new trailers, and all these sort of exclusive little interviews and things like that, and those were always exciting. Now, they've sort of toned that down a little bit, and it's become more of a consumer show over the years, which that's perfectly fine in my opinion, and I actually think it was a good direction given how the industry has been going. A lot of the big players in the industry have kind of moved towards their own sort of conferences or these smaller shows to sort of show off their new hardware or new software, and the newest games kind of get announced every day. And so that's sort of the route that we've ended up seeing with that. But at the same time, it is kind of exciting to have this big giant show, and they do still have quite a bit going on for it. And it is one of the few shows where the big players in the industry are able to go into it and be like, here's half of our marketing money for the year. Let's go ahead and just go full blast. So what is E3? If you don't actually know what E3 is the Electronic Entertainment Expo, and basically it centers around gaming. Sometimes we get some tech releases, and so I know Nvidia in the past has announced some new hardware and stuff like that alongside it, but for the most part, it pertains mostly to the big players in the industry, mostly AAA. So, you know, the big players like Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo have been the primary three. I know Sega has done stuff in the past that I've been really excited for, and mostly a lot of kind of interesting AAA games get introduced in the sort of E3 era. The problem with it, in my opinion, however, is the fact that it is generally just a lot of advertisements. It is basically a giant show that we're supposed to get hyped up about, and it is just a bunch of advertisements. They show us a bunch of trailers, they give us a bunch of hyperbole, and they're like, hey, this is what's going on in the future, and it could just not happen in the future. A lot of people now have especially been more skeptical because this has actually been increasingly a problem. We've been seeing games like, let's say, Watch Dogs, or the more notorious No Man's Sky, which was basically an outright lie. Although those tend to be a little bit more extreme. I know Watch Dogs, the sort of visual downgrade and stuff like that, nobody was happy about that. But at the same time, this isn't the first time that it's happened. It's been happening for years, and it's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily look at trailers to represent the game. It's one of those situations where I've always learned that trailer doesn't mean that that's what the game's going to be. In fact, I've learned that it's kind of rarely what the game will be. It ends up being one of those cases where you can't really trust trailers anymore because we like to add in a lot of stuff. I know back in the day, we used to have a lot of animated trailers and stuff like that, and those were always exciting. I remember seeing the whole, I think it was Final Fantasy VII. It was either, I think it was Final Fantasy VIII, where they had the whole cinematic trailer thing, and they're like, oh, it looks so real, the game's gonna be so real, and then it's just like, yeah, the actual game didn't look like that, but at the same time, that's kind of what ended up going on. And it was a little bit more transparent, I would say, just because we knew graphics couldn't end up looking realistic, but nowadays, they can. And so we could actually have trailers that are, you know, all upgraded and everything, and that's actually how some games end up looking these days, and they could downgrade them. But for the most part, it ends up being a marketing show, and so it's basically them just trying to market products to everyone, and I find that a little bit boring. I don't see these special cases of showing it in E3. Now, E3 is a special occasion because it does push incentive on these bigger players to sort of do the whole we win E3 sort of situation, to where this ends up happening every year. Everyone talks about who won E3, and it ends up being a nice, good marketing push, because even though a lot of people have fallen off the E3 train, especially since, nowadays we can get news from pretty much anywhere. Back in my day, when I was a little kid and everything, I was always excited for E3 because we just have to go to magazines and things like that, and that was where I would get all of that sort of information. But nowadays, I go on the internet, there's already sort of cliff notes on everything that says every single announcement, the timestamps that it was in the conference, and the reality is also this ends up being a lot of time that doesn't need to be wasted. I don't need to sit there and listen to them talk about the newest game and everything. I just want to see the trailer and see what's going on in there. And even then, I just mentioned what I think about trailers as well. And so, yeah, it ends up being one of those cases to where I'm not necessarily interested in that. That said, some people definitely are, and I don't blame them for it, because it is exciting to see a new announcement. They announced a sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest, and I'm like, oh my god, I so want it! The trailer shows nothing of the game. It shows the artwork, which we already knew the game was going to be gorgeous because that's how the last game was. The last game was absolutely beautiful. I did a review of it, and I love it. It's one of my favorite platformers of all time. That said, the trailer didn't actually show anything, so really I don't care, but I'm still excited to get a sequel, and that's what I care about, is the announcements. And so I like the show because it is important, because it gives these larger companies an incentive to show off their new products, new hardware, whatever it is, to try and, show everyone what's going on. It just kind of sucks that they end up marketing it up. Now, I've heard that this E3 has been a bit better. They've had some more interesting sort of discussions and things like that. But one of the other sort of important things to this is the fact that they also introduce things like, let's say, marketing decisions or new software that they're introducing. And I'm not talking about games. Like, Bethesda has announced a new sort of Creators Club, I think is what they're calling it. And basically, it's a new modding platform for paid mods, which I have a whole video prepared for that one. That's going to be fun, but we'll talk about that another day. And that's sort of exciting. And, they like to do that sort of thing. It's like, hey, we've got this thing, we've got it, and it's in the presence of E3, and it allows people to be a little bit more hyped about it. And yes, critics and things like that are still going to be skeptical about it, and that's kind of what we're paid to do. That's kind of our job. But for the most part, it is one of those situations where they can show it to consumers, and consumers are generally hyped during E3. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily have enough skepticism during the E3 sort of situation. And so, yeah, but it is a good thing to actually get that out, because what would Bethesda do without that? Well, they'd probably just release it and then it would come out to be a train wreck rather than just telling anyone beforehand, similar to the last time they tried paid mods. So, yeah, once again, I'll have a whole discussion about that later once they actually release it. But I'm really excited for that one, because that's going to be interesting, I think. We'll see how it ends up going. And that's why I'm not necessarily interested in E3. I also don't have a lot of time to spend on that sort of stuff. I would rather spend my time creating other sort of content, spending my time with other games. Recently, a new Neptunia game came out, and so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to play. Well, it's not new. It came out on PC. It's actually fairly old. I think it's like 3 years old or something like that. But regardless, I'm playing it for the first time, and so I'm enjoying it. But that's the sort of thing I would rather spend my time on, and I would rather just look at the cliff notes and be like, hey. But I do know that some people want to hear my thoughts about it, and they want to hear other people's thoughts as well, and so I will be looking around, and I like to also see everyone else's opinions. One of my sort of... God, I am failing at this jump here. Please don't die. There we go. One of the kind of big parts about my sort of discussions that I like to do is I also like to bring in other sides of the opinions. And when it's in the sort of cusp of the show, mostly everyone is being cynical right now, and a lot of people aren't really thinking about it a lot critically, I would say. A lot of people are looking at it and being like, oh yeah, it's a big marketing event, yada yada, and that's sort of the perspective we're getting at in a lot of these aspects. And that's okay, but I want to see what people say afterwards. And this is the other aspect of why I generally wait, and this is the big reason as well. We get a lot of news after E3 that is relevant to the news we got during E3. After E3 goes on, we generally get a lot of sort of clarifications on what was going on. E3 is a big show. They have to show a lot of things for each different conference, and they generally are kind of scraped for time, even though it probably doesn't seem like it when they do these all big like musical cues. They do all these sort of interesting advertising events. I'm like, hey, by the way, we've got this coming out. Hey, get excited and hyped, yada yada, and they wait for the crowd to go off. But in the reality of things, they do end up showing quite a bit at these E3 conferences. And so, for that sort of sake, they also kind of skip a lot of the details. And it's also because it is a show. It's not an announcement. It is about kind of making a show for other people to view. And so when they end up going out to after the E3, they'll be like, hey, I know that we're going to get a lot more details on the sort of Creators Club from Bethesda after E3 is over. Because that's when people are going to be paying attention to it. It's like, hey, I heard this thing on E3. The people that are actually interested in it are going to be looking for more information, and they can kind of scoop up that sort of crowd and get some good publicity from it if they announce, the right sort of details, that is. And so that's generally what they end up doing. And so I can wait until after and get more details on a lot of these topics. So it's not just, this is what was said at E3. If you ended up checking out the other E3 content, you'll already know the information that was there. And so it ends up being kind of useless. Instead, I can look at it and be like, this is also what has followed up afterwards, because I'm all about sort of adding to the discussion. And that is definitely going to add to the discussion. Now, obviously, not everything gets clarified and some things kind of disappear after E3. And I do run into this sort of case. This approach does run into some situations where I could end up missing some news. I know that some news has already been kind of pushed under the rug, so I'm kind of keeping a list that I'm interested in and stuff like that. Like Black Desert, for example, was announced for the Xbox. And so that's exciting. I know it's on PC. I'm enjoying the hell out of it right now. And so, yeah, that's generally exciting. But at the same time, I think it's the better way to go about it. And I don't think for consumers at all, there is really any reason to go and look at all the news right away. I don't think it's one of those situations where you're going to be like needing to follow everything. And some people do like to, because, once again, it is into hype and it is exciting to see these new games. A lot of people like AAA games and like, hey, they're announcing this new game, or maybe there's a new indie game at the show. And it's like, oh yeah, I never heard about that. And, it's a good way to find new games, and that's great. And that's what it's for. It's to actually be basically an advertisement, which is a little bit unfortunate when you put it into those wordings, but it's not always bad. We watch game announcements all the time, even when it's not at a giant E3 show. And, it's one of those things. It's kind of how the gaming industry works. It's a little bit different than most sort of entertainment mediums. I know that stuff like, let's say, movies and stuff like that plays off of the same sort of scene. But when it comes down to like books and things like that, they'll be like, oh yeah, we have this new book coming out, and they'll sort of advertise it completely differently. But when it comes down to like gaming and stuff like that, we get our information through advertising, which maybe isn't the best way to go about it. And maybe that's going to be something that will change in the future, and maybe we can find different ways to go about it. But at the same time, that's kind of like what we want to see. We want to see the game. We want to see these cinematic trailers. It's nice to get hyped up. And for the people that are getting hyped up, that's exciting. I wish I could get hyped up about things. There are a few things I am excited for, but most of them didn't come from E3. Actually, they came from the sort of side announcements, or, publishers or developers are just like, yeah, by the way, we have this working on. Well, we won't be announcing it at E3. Like, that's the stuff I'm excited for, which is kind of funny. Like Microsoft's HoloLens. I don't know if they showed off any HoloLens at E3, but that's something I'm more excited about. But I think they've kind of shifted away from gaming on that. I'm more interested in the sort of business aspects to it and the more tech side of that. So I think they'll probably show that off at a tech show. And so maybe I'm just, that's just sort of me. But for the people that are getting hyped, I'm happy for you. That is actually really, really exciting. And I love getting hyped about things, but at the same time, do make sure to keep a certain amount of cynicism. Make sure to be like, all right, what is this actually going to come out? And keep realistic expectations. We saw No Man's Sky about 2 years ago, I think is actually when it was. Wow, it was a while ago. And so basically, yeah, they announced that it had this obviously pre-built little world and cinematic sort of trailer thing going on. And it was obviously scripted, and then the game came out and it was nothing like it, which doesn't surprise me. I was very cynical about it from the start. I'm like, this is a small indie studio trying to make this big giant promise. This always fails. And so, yeah, but I don't know. There's a few things I am excited for, though. Just make sure not to buy into pre-order culture. This is sort of one of those cases where they try and get everyone to pre-order these things before they're even, in halfway through development. They're like, hey, by the way, this game will be coming out in 2 years. Make sure you pre-order it in a year and a half, and you'll get these pre-order bonuses. I don't know if they've actually done any of that, but that is a thing that they have tried to do in the past. I heard this year is better with that, and so I'm actually excited to actually look through all the news, so maybe, people will be a little bit more honest with their impressions on it and be like, yeah, this is what I genuinely think, rather than being like, oh, they tried to get me to pre-order this game. So, yeah, I don't know. It'll probably be better overall. So, real quick, before we end up ending this off, what are a few things I've actually heard about that I will be talking about in a few days, but I kind of want to talk about right off the bat. Obviously, the Bethesda sort of creators club thing. So far, we don't have a lot of details, and maybe they will release details later today after I'm recording this. But essentially, they are actually, introducing a new mod platform. Now, personally, I prefer things like Nexus mods or open platforms that allow you to have pretty much any freedom that you can with mods. I believe mods should be an open platform. There's also like, let's say like, I know PC Gamer did a whole thing about adult mods and things like that as well, which was kind of funny as well to see that. But that is that whole side of things. Obviously, they won't be allowing that sort of thing. And I don't think it's going to be one of those situations to where they remove other platforms. But it is sort of introducing a new platform alongside their sort of console sort of thing. Because I do have the sort of console exclusive thing is it console exclusive? I don't know. They have the whole not paid mods. They have the whole mods thing. You can tell from the way I'm kind of displaying my thoughts. I haven't really thought about it too much because I just heard about the news today. But essentially, they have a new mods platform that's going to work on PC and everything like that, and they announced it at E3. They don't have a lot of details on it, but I'm really excited to see where it goes because I'm not against paid mods, but they're definitely going to have to be very careful with it, and they've got to do it right, because if they do it wrong, it's just going to fail like last time. And there's a lot of problems with paid mods, and I hope they actually ended up looking into that, but we'll obviously see it in the future. Bloodstained got a new trailer as well. I'm really excited for that game. A lot of people are saying like, oh, it looks slow and it looks out of date and the animations are weird. I'll admit the animations are a bit weird. They have been improving trailer by trailer. And so like the last trailer they released looked pretty much half the quality that this one does, but they showed off a new area. They showed off a boss, which does look slow, but I actually enjoy that. The old Castlevania games were not very quick. It does look a little bit slower than, let's say, Order of Ecclesia, for example, was one of the more quicker ones. And so it does look a little bit slower than that. So the quicker Castlevanias, it's probably going to be slightly slower than those. And I think that might be actually a good thing. I think they're going more towards, Symphony of the Night. I don't know why I forgot the name for a second there. And the more sort of Soma-style games. And so those games were a little bit more slower paced, and they focused more on heavier sort of combat and more strategic gameplay, rather than more of an action-oriented one. And Order of Ecclesia did some of that as well. I think it was the perfect blend. Order of Ecclesia is my favorite Castlevania game so far, and so I've actually been replaying that one recently, and I'm really, really enjoying it. But I'm really excited for that game. I know it's probably not going to be like, oh my god, instant classic, but I know it's going to be at least decent. Just from how it looks good. I'm not 100% a fan of the new sort of art style. I think that would have been nice if they would have gone for a pixel art style, but I also understand why they're going for the 3D art. It is a new studio. They don't have the same artist. They have some of the same guys. They have the same, creator and everything like that of Symphony of the Night. And so I keep forgetting his name because I'm terrible with names, but regardless, he's an amazing designer, and he does a really good job with all the games he's made. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for that one. I know it's going to be pretty good as well. And then obviously, this is the last topic I'll cover on at the end of this video. I'll have more in a few days, more sort of solid concrete. There is a plug I'm missing here. I gotta go find him. Am I just missing one? I'm just missing one. Anyways, yeah, so Xbox One X. I don't know if they released the specs yet. I know they announced it and they said like, hey, it's going to have 4K gaming and it's going to be great. And I'm like, no, it won't. It'll be 4K gaming at like 30 FPS because this thing is going to be $500. And this is the huge concern a lot of us have been having because we wanted, at least us on the PC side of things, I don't know how console players are looking at it because they probably just want a cheaper machine in general. But for the PC market, we wanted at least $600 machine that could actually play these console exclusives. Now, one thing that they have been doing is they've been releasing a lot of console exclusives on Windows 10. And so we've actually been getting a lot of these games on Windows because Microsoft has realized like, hey, the console market is dying. It's not something that's going to be, sort of lasting forever. And it's definitely not going to last for them. If somebody ends up outlasting them, it's probably going to be Sony in this market. But they also have this entire PC platform pretty much locked down. And so they can end up kind of sprouting onto that. So that's what I'm actually excited about. They've actually talked about, some other Xbox exclusive sort of stuff. And that is all coming to sort of PC as well. They also announced Minecraft will be cross-platform as well, except for on Sony platforms. And so this also plays into that same idea of, they're not trying to compete with the console market. They don't care. Sony does, and that's why Minecraft won't be in there. I'll talk about this in a few days more in depth if you want to check out that video. God, it's going to be a long video. But yeah, so basically Xbox One, Xbox One X, or whatever they're calling it, used to be called Xbox Scorpio. Not too excited about it. It's, I'm not expecting a lot from $500. Now, they could be selling this thing at a huge loss, but at the same time, I can't think of any Xbox exclusives that I actually want. I can't even, I can think of 2 PlayStation exclusives, and the thing is, they got announced to be coming for PC, so I don't really care. Like, Disgaea, for example, is currently on Sony consoles only, but they announced that it will be coming to PC eventually, and so I'm just waiting for that because I still haven't finished the second game a 300th time, so basically I'll be seeing that, but the new one ended up getting announced for it. This was before E3, though, and I didn't do a video on it because normally I don't cover things like game announcements and stuff like that because I don't like to play into hype and stuff like that. Why isn't my bot coming over here? Get over here. God damn it. And so basically I kind of go into one of those situations to where it's like, I would rather just, you know, see how the game is, because I don't like to play into the hype, and I definitely don't want to add into that. I don't want to be one of those guys that sort of talks about one of these things that shows up in E3. And this is one of the other reasons why I end up waiting and actually put a lot more thought into it, is I don't want to be one of those guys that hype something up and then everyone's disappointed in it and it ends up being absolutely terrible. Like, I hate to do a preview for a game and then have it come out and just be absolutely terrible. And there's been a few times where I've been really skeptical about that on myself. This is kind of off topic, but you know, like I covered Dead Cells, for example. I was one of the early developers one of the early content creators to developers ended up sending a key to. And I was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to check this out, because they did a whole sort of sweep and they ended up sending it to a ton of people. And I checked it out. I was like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. You know, it's obviously going to depend on how good the content is in the future and how much it's got. But I liked it. I thought it was fairly promising, and I was really excited to hear that other people were saying the same thing, because I'd hate to be one of those guys that, you know, looks at the game, thinks it's all right, and then ends up being absolutely terrible, because yeah, and that's why I don't do a lot of early coverage. But that's a topic for another video in the future, perhaps. But that's my thoughts on E3. It is mostly a marketing event, and I'm not going to be covering it live or anything like that, but I will be covering it in the time coming. So if you want to hear about all the details sort of clobbered into about an hour-long show or something like that, I'll just sort of end up doing that, doing a lot of topics that I'm more sort of interested in and more sort of relevant towards. I won't be talking more about game announcements unless they have some sort of relevance to me and my audience and games that I've covered in the past. And so don't worry, I'm not going to be like, they announced a new AAA game, they announced another AAA game, they announced this other AAA. No, I'm not going to do that. Don't worry about that. That's going to be not something I do. I'm going to focus it around discussion and actually being concrete, just like I am in all my other topic videos and this one. So yeah, anyways, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. Game in the background has been reCore, a game that literally everyone forgot about because basically it was announced at E3 and people just stopped caring because it came out and people were like, it's not what I was expecting, even though it is pretty much exactly what they promised. It's a classic sort of collectathon game with some interesting elements, and it's more modernized up. It has some technical issues and stuff like that, especially at launch. And so that kind of turned a lot of people off of it. But I actually enjoy it, and I forgot I had it installed. So, yeah, when I said everyone forgot about it, that definitely includes me. But it's a fun little game. I just enjoy playing it every once in a while. I still haven't finished it. I was going to do a whole review of it, and basically it just fell off my radar, and just nobody really cares about it too much, which is unfortunate. And it also plays into the hype because it was announced at E3 several years ago, and everyone's like, oh my god, it has the creator of, I believe it was creator Mega Man on the project, and everyone's like, oh my god, it's gonna be amazing, everyone get hyped, and then it comes out and everyone's like, no. And so yeah, it's one of those, it's just another one of those cases to where, you know, hype really doesn't mean much. There's a lot of games that get announced at E3 that nobody ends up talking about in the future, and this has always been the case. And so, yeah, it's just a testament to it. But it's not a bad game. I enjoy it. It's kind of repetitive, as you've probably seen in this video. I've just been sitting here shooting at things for half an hour. I haven't really been doing any of the puzzle stuff because I haven't played it in so long because I forgot I had it installed. And so basically, I don't even know where I'm supposed to be going. So I'm just running around destroying robot dogs that are kicking my butt right now. And so, yeah. I don't even remember how to use my robot's abilities. And so, there we go. I remember I can use the vent thing by pushing X. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. And, of course, if you want to hear about the E3 sort of stuff, I will be covering that in a few days. I'm going to wait until after Nintendo's conference as well, which isn't technically part of E3, but it may as well be because they do their whole digital thing. They actually do a lot of prep stuff. They don't do their show live and stuff like that. And so that's interesting. I don't really care about Nintendo. I actually had a whole discussion with somebody the other day about Nintendo, and I'm like, I don't really care. But at the same time, I'll be trying to cover their stuff as well. They've announced a lot of stuff about the whole Nintendo stuff. They did the whole Nintendo Online thing, but I was sick during that week, and so I didn't end up covering it because my voice was killed. And so, yeah, I have to cover that as well. So that'll probably be discussed in there because I'll most likely talk more about that stuff. But anyways, if there's any specific stuff you would like to hear in depth about E3, as well, make sure to throw it my way and leave it in the comments or the comments of the next video if I don't end up covering it. And I will make sure to get onto videos of that because there's a lot of stuff that got announced that could definitely be some in-depth discussion and stuff that I'm actually genuinely excited for. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Now, I did mention that a new Natinia game was released, and everyone knows I'm a huge fan of that, and so I'm going to go back to playing that. Goodbye, this game. How do I even exit this game? Exit game! Yes!